Today, I'm taking a look at a sim racing wheel that may look very familiar to you. This is the new MOZA Racing R16 wheelbase. Essentially, it's a version 2 of the R16 that released a few years ago, with some quality of life improvements and upgrades to its overall performance. MOZA's decided to not stick a V2 or a version number after this wheelbase's name. Instead, like many movie franchises that don't want to think of a new film title for their sequel, it's just going to be known as the MOZA R16, but newer. In this review, I'm going to take an in-depth look at the MOZA R16 V2, not called V2. I'll put it through its paces on track to see if the new force feedback updates improve what MOZA already had going on. I do want to say that this R16 was sent to me by MOZA for review, but as with all our videos, this doesn't affect my final outcome in any way. So if we go way back, all the way to the end of 2021, okay, it's not actually that long ago, but it certainly feels like it. But MOZA Racing in 2021 were pretty new on the sim racing scene, and their first big products were the R16 and R21 wheelbases. These products firmly put MOZA on the map and were pretty darn good, especially for a first attempt at a sim racing wheel. Now we've just seen a big wheelbase release from another small sim racing brand, although I'm not going to name names. And we now have an updated version of the R16 wheelbase. Coincidence? I'll let you decide that one. But starting with the price of this MOZA R16 V2. It remains unchanged from the original price, and I have to say, compared to other products in a similar performance range, it's pretty competitive. If you're buying this R16 in the United States, it'll cost you $800. If you're buying in the UK, £800. Anywhere in Europe, it's around 870 euros, or it's $1,400 if you're in Australia. It is important to say that these prices are all before tax, which will vary depending on where you're shipping to. When we compare those prices to that other product that I mentioned, that I'm sure no one's ever heard of before, the R16 comes out pretty favourably. Again, this is before tax compared to including tax with the Club Sport DD, so prices may be more comparable after you add tax for your region. Now, moving on to the design of the R16, and you'll see that not much has changed. However, that's a slight lie, as we do have some extra bolt holes at the front, so we can now front mount this wheelbase if we want to. Ultimately, if you watched my R21 review a little while back, everything I'm about to say now has already been echoed in that review. But for those that didn't watch that review, let's talk about the design a little bit. Now, some of the choices that MOZA made when initially designing this concept are a little quirky compared to more standard wheelbase designs that we've seen from other brands. And that'll be a big hit or a miss depending on your taste. For me, I'm not a huge fan of the swooping lines, the side vents and the gloss finish, as I do prefer a slightly more understated look. And this design to me looks a little bit too much like a mid-2000s body kit that you'd find on an old car trying to do donuts in a car park after dark. But that's just my own preference. Others may love this design. And the slanted body actually can help you mount your monitor a little bit closer to the top of the base, which is a nice touch. Now, the mounting is one area that's changed on this R16 V2, as you now have the option to mount from underneath or at the front. This is a really nice inclusion that I do like to see, and for many, front mounting or side mounting using the mounted bracket will be a better way to go. You'll see that despite the ability to front mount the R16, I've gone for the bottom mounting option simply for the reason that the front mount wouldn't align to any holes on my SimLab rig. I did have this thing sitting in the front mount and all bolted up, and despite me not actually putting it under strain of gameplay while attached to the mount, the front mount did feel rock solid. Another area of improvement is around the back. There are now more connection ports than on the original R16, which is a big upgrade. You can now directly connect your other MOZA peripherals to this wheelbase and avoid having multiple USB ports on your PC clogged with various peripherals like shifters and handbrakes. And this addition is also incredibly important in another way. By adding all the required ports for pedals, shifters, handbrakes, this R16 V2 suddenly has the capability of being used on console. And I'll talk a little bit more about the significance of that later on in this review. At the front, you have the MOZA Quick Release, which fundamentally remains unchanged, although there are some additional contact points in the Quick Release itself which allow more MOZA steering wheels to be compatible with this R16 than they were with the original. Now every steering wheel, other than the ES steering wheel, is compatible with this R16 V2. Okay, I'm going to stop saying V2 now, as Moza are going to get really mad at me, as they specifically told me there wasn't a version number in the name. And with that, let's quickly move on to the performance of this wheelbase. Now, one of the big differences is that Moza have upgraded the force feedback algorithm in the R16 compared to the original. Now, I reviewed the R21 a while back. I remember the overall force feedback in the R21 was good, if not a touch heavy at times when you made contact with big curbs and other elements like that. After reviewing the R21, I was lucky enough to also review the R12, which, while being a step down in overall peak strength compared to the R21, the force feedback detail was actually much better, and that is due to the R12 being newer than the R21. Well, you'll be glad to hear that in this R16, the internals have been partially upgraded to feel more like that R12. That means better force feedback detail, especially in the areas where the smaller details are felt. When talking about small details, elements such as curb rumbles and vibrations are improved over the outgoing R16 Gen 1. In my R12 review, I said that the vibrations were handled so well that you could feel tyre slip and understeer in the wheel in a completely different way to how the other forces were felt. And this is echoed through to the R16 now. Say you're mid-corner, you will feel the weight of the car and the weight of the wheel pulling at you. However, in that exact same moment, you can also feel small vibrations in the wheel telling you that you're right on the edge of grip or just stepping over it. These small vibrations and sensations really allow you to push your car much closer to the limit than you can with some wheels, with the original R16 included. What this new R16 accomplishes by introducing these new sensations that were simply not as prevalent in the original R16 is that it now feels much more like an upgrade over the R12, whereas before it didn't really feel like it much. I do believe that around 10 to 15 Newton meters is the optimal torque range, and of course this will depend on your own personal preference, but I think above this the wheel simply becomes too heavy and too much to handle for longer races, to the point where things aren't quite as enjoyable. At 16 Newton meters, this wheelbase sits right at the top of this 10 to 15 Newton meter range. However, the beauty of having 16 Newton meters of peak torque to play with is that you can always detune it somewhat. Lowering that peak force using Moza's pit house lets you set your ideal strength value where you feel comfortable for an entire session. But you may ask, why would I upgrade to the R16 if I'm just going to detune it back down to 12 Newton meters? Well, what this does give you is more headroom if you ever need it. When I first raced with the Fanatec CSL DD at 8 Newton meters, I was convinced that it was the pinnacle of force feedback. However, over time, I wanted just that little bit more strength from that wheel that it couldn't give me. The R16 gives you this compared to the R12. Also, with the R16 being stronger than the R12, you get access to a wider range for the force feedback to work within. The stronger peak force gives those small details much more room to operate and differentiate themselves from other force feedback. Now, I touched on it a little bit just now, but when it does come to tuning this wheel up or down, as with all Moza products, you get access to Moza's pit house software. This gives you an incredible amount of control over the behaviour of your wheel. In some ways it can be a little bit overwhelming, but if that is the case, you can simply stick to the basic settings which give you the ability to tune your wheel strength up and down. Compatibility with this updated Moza R16 is a big category to talk about, as it's actually one of the main improvements. As I mentioned, there are ports on the rear of this wheelbase for all your Moza peripherals to connect to. Also, the quick release has been upgraded to include new contact points to allow compatibility with all of Moza's steering wheel lineup minus the ES wheel. But the real talking point is Moza's R16 console compatibility. With the added ports at the rear, the R16 now has the ability to be compatible with Xbox consoles. This isn't the first Xbox compatible Moza wheel, although the R3 is in a completely different league in terms of performance. But the R16 is the first powerful wheelbase that Moza has made Xbox compatible. And this gives console sim racers a real choice if shopping around for a strong direct drive wheelbase. After speaking to Moza and actually testing the console compatibility myself, it's important to say that currently the Xbox compatibility isn't there, but it has been confirmed to be a part of Moza's future roadmap. Basically, it's going to get added at some point in the future, but we just don't know when. And when this console compatibility does get added, I think it'll actually be one of the main selling points for the R16. If you're moving up through the ranks of sim racing wheels and you're looking to upgrade to a more powerful direct drive wheel, the R16 will become a true option for Xbox sim racers. Outside of console compatibility, this R16 sits as a nice option to choose from alongside the Fanatec Club Sport DD Plus and Simucute 2 Sport, to name a couple of competitors. If you're already invested in the MOZA ecosystem, say you've got an R5 or an R9 and you want something with a bit more oomph, this upgraded R16 is the perfect path to upgrade to.